"This is first class, ma'am. People like you don't belong here." That's what flight attendant Lauren Baxter said before slapping the hand of an elderly black woman holding a cane. What she didn't know was that woman wasn't just a passenger. She was the CEO and founder of the airline. What followed wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a viral takedown. It was something far more shocking. A second chance that would transform an entire industry. This is the true story of redemption, power, and the quiet revolution that started at Gate A23. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now, let's get back to the story. Step aside, ma'am. First class isn't for you. The voice cut through the terminal like a blade, sharp, condescending, and unmistakably public. The air at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International was thick with the usual symphony of rolling suitcases, impatient footsteps, and boarding calls blaring from overhead speakers. But in an instant, the world around Gate A23 seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups hovered halfway to lips. Heads turned slowly toward the source of the voice. There, at the center of the unfolding tension, stood Lauren Baxter, a striking flight attendant with a perfectly pressed uniform, platinum blonde hair pulled into a taut bun, and eyes the color of winter glass. Her body language was stiff, like she was holding back from something worse. But it was her voice, the tone beneath the words, that carried the real weight. Suspicion dressed as policy, bias masked as procedure. Facing her, steady and unmoved, was Camille Dawson. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze. The cane in her right hand, a masterpiece of carved mahogany with an ivory inlaid head, rested lightly against her side, not out of necessity but elegance. Her emerald green coat draped over her frame with effortless grace, the silver scarf at her collar catching left airport light like a ribbon of moonlight. She was a woman in her late 60s, tall and composed, with salt and pepper curls styled into a low chignon. And when she spoke, her voice came not with defensiveness, but with authority carved from years of silence turned into steel. "I heard you the first time," Camille said softly. "I also heard something beneath it. You're not just asking for a ticket, are you?" Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out. Her jaw twitched, caught between embarrassment and defiance. Around them, a small circle of onlookers had already formed, pretending to fiddle with their phones or adjust their luggage. But their eyes betrayed their true interest. Something electric was pulsing through the terminal now, not noise, not movement, but tension. Camille's eyes held Lauren's like two opposing truths, locked in an unspoken war. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I'll ask you once," Lauren snapped finally, doubling down. "Please step out of the boarding line. This zone is restricted to first class. You can't be here without a valid ticket." The air around them grew colder. Camille tilted her head ever so slightly, like a queen entertaining a fool. "And what about me?" she asked gently. "Tells you that I don't belong in first class." A pause. Lauren's nostrils flared. Her eyes narrowed, and her grip on her boarding manifest tightened. It wasn't that she had no answer, it was that the answer didn't sound good when said out loud. Especially not in front of all these strangers. Especially not to a woman who carried herself with such terrifying calm. "You're disrupting the boarding process," Lauren said, voice clipped, masking her panic with false control. "If you continue." A soft thud interrupted her. Camille had shifted her weight slightly, and the cane slipped from her fingers, landing on the polished floor with a startling clatter. The noise echoed through the terminal like a gunshot. A collective gasp rose from the passengers nearby. And then, without a hint of urgency or apology, Camille leaned forward and retrieved it. She stood again, slower this time. Her spine straightened like the resetting of a clock. The moment she rose, she wasn't just a woman at an airport anymore. She was something bigger. "Miss Baxter," Camille said, her tone not sharp, but absolute. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you're doing, because what happens next, you won't be able to take back." Lauren froze. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. For a moment, it was like something inside her screamed to walk away, to let it go. But pride, pride is louder than instinct. And prejudice, once stirred, rarely retreats quietly. She stepped forward. "Unless you can show me proof of your ticket, I will have you escorted out of the boarding area, she declared, louder now, intentionally raising her voice. This isn't a game, and we have procedures for a reason. Camille slowly blinked, like someone watching a chess piece move exactly where she expected. Her gaze scanned the crowd briefly, noticing the smartphones raised slightly higher, the eyebrows lifted, the murmur of whispers swelling into background static. And then, calmly, she slid her hand into her coat pocket. Out came a slim, dark leather ticket holder, minimalist, expensive, clearly custom. She opened it with care, as though presenting evidence in a courtroom, and held it out for Lauren to see. Seat 1A, she said. North Star Airways, Atlanta to Zurich, first class. Lauren took the ticket and stared. For a beat too long, she didn't react. Her eyes scanned the details once. Then again, then a third time, as though the information might change. But it didn't. The name on the boarding pass read Camille Dawson. Seat 1A. Valid, verified, impeccable. Still, the shock didn't come from the name. It came from the last line of fine print. Executive Chairwoman, North Star Airways Corporation. Lauren's breath caught. And just like that, everything she thought she knew, about the woman before her, about her own authority, about the moment she believed she was in control, crumbled in her hands like ash. The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't cheer. But something shifted in the atmosphere, like everyone suddenly knew they'd just witnessed a moment of monumental consequence. Camille took back her ticket with grace and tucked it into her coat. Then she looked at Lauren with a gaze that held no anger, only disappointment deeper than words. You just made a career-defining decision, she said, not loudly, but with a finality that struck deeper than any threat. And not in the way you think. A beat passed, then another. From the far side of the terminal, footsteps approached, firm, commanding. A man in a charcoal gray suit, Jonathan Sharp, Senior VP of North Star Airways, strode into the scene, his eyes scanning the situation, landing on Camille, then Lauren, then the scraps of tension still hanging in the air like fog. And without waiting for a single word from Camille, he bowed his head in respect. Madam Chairwoman, he said, voice calm, reverent, I'm deeply sorry for what just occurred. I'll handle this from here. Every passenger within earshot now understood the truth. The woman Lauren had humiliated in front of a terminal full of witnesses, the woman whose hand she slapped, whose dignity she questioned, was the owner of the airline. Not just a first-class passenger, not just a CEO, but the architect of the very company Lauren wore on her badge. And as Lauren's world tilted on its axis, as her throat tightened and the horror of her actions crashed down like a tidal wave, Camille simply stepped aside. Not to yield, but to rise above. She didn't gloat, she didn't rage, she just walked past her, with all the poise of a queen returning to her throne. And as she did, she whispered just loud enough for Lauren to hear. Grace, Miss Baxter, is the difference between power and cruelty. I hope someday you'll learn the difference. And with that, she disappeared into the jet bridge, leaving behind a woman drowning in her own disgrace, and a terminal full of strangers forever changed by the calm power of dignity. The sound of Camille Dawson's footsteps vanished into the jet bridge, but the echo of her final words lingered like a low-pressure system, unseen but heavy, palpable in every breath drawn by those still frozen in the gate area. No one moved. No one spoke. They just watched as the woman Lauren Baxter had publicly humiliated revealed herself, without grandstanding or spectacle, to be the most powerful person in the company. Lauren stood paralyzed. The boarding manifest trembled slightly in her hands. She didn't say who she was, she stammered under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. Jonathan Sharp turned to her slowly. His face, usually expressionless behind executive decorum, was now tight with visible restraint. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lash out, but the intensity behind his eyes could have leveled a storm. Did she need to? He asked, low and direct. Lauren looked away. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore, it was exposure. In a matter of minutes, her facade of polished professionalism had cracked open, and now, beneath it, all that remained was raw, naked prejudice. Something she hadn't even acknowledged in herself until it stood face to face with her wearing emerald green and a carved cane. I was doing my job, she said, reaching desperately for control. I was following protocol. If passengers try to enter first class without verification, we're supposed to. Jonathan raised a hand, not harshly but decisively. Stop. Don't finish that sentence. She fell silent. The watching passengers were no longer just bystanders. They had become jurors, witnesses, archivists of a modern reckoning. Phones had stopped recording, some out of respect, others because they instinctively knew this was no longer entertainment. It was a turning point. One of them, a silver-haired woman in a navy pantsuit, Dana Lawrence, a civil rights attorney and frequent flyer, stepped forward. She didn't say much, just one line, spoken quietly to Lauren as she passed. "You dismissed her, and you don't even know who she is." Lauren turned toward her, face pale. Dana shook her head softly, then turned to Jonathan. "She needs to be grounded. Immediately." Jonathan gave a tight nod. "Already handled. Security will escort her to a holding room once the flight departs." And just like that, Lauren's wings, once proudly spread under a name badge she wore like armor, had been clipped. Inside the aircraft, the mood was unlike anything the crew had experienced. As Camille Dawson settled into seat 1A, her presence alone shifted the energy in the cabin. There were no whispers, no overcompensating apologies, just a reverent silence, like the passengers collectively understood they were witnessing someone who had walked through fire and refused to be burned. She didn't check her phone, she didn't complain, she didn't ask for special treatment. She just sat and waited. A few rows back, Ethan Brooks, the young entrepreneur who had watched the entire incident unfold from the VIP lounge and later the boarding area, was still processing. He'd felt it, something visceral, when he first saw her by the runway window earlier that day. Not pity, not admiration, recognition. Like he was looking at someone who had survived storms no one else even knew existed. He'd seen it in her eyes before Lauren had even spoken. And he'd known, the moment the cane hit the floor, that this was going to become something much bigger than a boarding dispute. Dana Lawrence, now seated in 2D, leaned over to Ethan. "That flight attendant? She's not coming back from this." "She could," Ethan replied, "but only if she burns down everything inside herself and starts from ash." Dana arched an eyebrow. "You think she will?" "I think she just got handed the map. Whether she follows it, that's up to her." Back at the gate, the walk to the disciplinary holding room was agonizing. Lauren Baxter, who once strutted through terminals with a sense of invincibility, now shuffled behind a security escort. Her uniform still perfect, her bun still tight, but everything else about her had crumbled. She could feel the eyes, not just judging, remembering, etching her into their memory as the woman who slapped a black CEO and tried to strip her of dignity with nothing but a doubt-soaked voice. The walk wasn't long, but it felt like a mile. When she stepped inside the private holding room, the lights were clinical, the air too still. There were no passengers here, no crowd to lean into, just herself, her mistake, and the awareness of what she had become in the span of a few minutes. On the table was a dossier, her employee file. A note was clipped to the top in crisp handwriting. "Await further instructions. You will be debriefed after Flight 934 departs. J.S." She sat, slowly, carefully, as if trying not to break what was left of her pride, but it was already broken. And for the first time since the slap that started it all, she let the tears fall. Not out of guilt, but because she realized she'd built her entire identity on a foundation she didn't even understand, and now it was gone. 30 minutes into the flight, a warm chime rang through the first-class cabin. A flight attendant, not Lauren, approached Camille Dawson. "Miss Dawson, is there anything we can bring you?" Camille looked up, her eyes clear, her voice as soft and deadly as snowfall. "Yes, tell your captain I'd like a word. After takeoff?" "Privately." The attendant nodded, wide-eyed, and disappeared toward the cockpit. Ethan Brooks leaned forward from his seat. "Excuse me, Miss Dawson. I don't mean to intrude, but I saw what happened." Camille turned, her face composed. "I didn't record," he clarified quickly, "but I was there. The whole time, I just wanted to say—" Camille held up a hand gently, signaling for silence. "Then don't say anything yet," she said. "Words spoken in haste, even in kindness, carry less weight than silence born of understanding." Ethan nodded slowly. "You know," she added, after a pause, "when she slapped my hand, it wasn't the pain that surprised me." He looked up. It was how familiar it felt. And in that moment, Ethan understood something deeper than anything he could ever articulate. This wasn't the first time Camille Dawson had been mistaken, dismissed, humiliated, but it would be the last time someone got away with it. Not because she fought fire with fire, but because she fought with silence, dignity, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, only to be told she didn't belong in the very house she built. Back on the ground, Lauren sat in the holding room as the minutes ticked by. She stared at her name badge on the table. Once it had meant everything. Now it looked like a relic from another life. The door opened. She turned, expecting a security officer. But it wasn't. It was a man in a gray suit, Jonathan Sharp. He didn't smile, didn't sit, just stood in the doorway and said, "She wants to speak with you, alone. When the plane returns, you'll listen, you won't talk. And after that, we'll decide what comes next." He didn't wait for a reply. He just closed the door behind him. And Lauren was left with the terrifying truth. Camille Dawson wasn't seeking revenge. She was preparing to give her the hardest gift anyone can receive, a second chance. One that demanded everything. Even the part of Lauren she hadn't realized needed changing. The plane glided above the clouds, a soft hush hanging in the first-class cabin as sunlight poured through the windows like spilled gold. It should have been serene, luxurious even. But beneath the silence, a storm brewed, one no turbulence alert could prepare anyone for. Camille Dawson remained seated in 1A, her cane resting gently across her lap. From the outside, she looked like any successful executive enjoying her transatlantic flight in peace. But internally, her thoughts raced, sharper than the flight path cutting through the sky. She had learned long ago how to hide the sting. She'd endured worse, slights buried under boardroom smiles, betrayals inked behind contracts, and policies designed to keep people like her waiting at the velvet rope. But the slap? The slap wasn't about the sting of skin meeting skin. It was about everything it represented. A legacy of dismissal, a presumption of lesser worth. A gate slammed shut, not because you didn't belong, but because someone else decided you shouldn't. And Lauren Baxter, whether she knew it or not, had carried that legacy with her into Gate A23. That's what hurt the most. Not that it happened, but that even after all these years, it could still happen so easily. Across the aisle, Ethan Brooks continued glancing at her, unsure if he should say more. Everyone in first class had their own version of the story now. Whispers, second-hand gasps, retellings half truthful and half mythical. But none had to carry the story the way Camille did. They would land, go home, perhaps recount it at a dinner party, a viral video, a headline, but she would wear it in her bones. The intercom buzzed softly. "Miss Dawson," came the captain's voice, respectful, warm, controlled. "Captain Langston here. I understand you requested a meeting. The cockpit door will be open after beverage service. At your convenience, ma'am." She smiled faintly, not at the captain, but at the way respect always returns when people realize who you are. The problem was, respect should never have to be earned with a title. She didn't rise yet. Instead, she reached into her leather folio and pulled out a document. It was a proposal. Not one she intended to share just yet, but one that had been on her mind long before this flight. A new internal training protocol for every flight attendant on North Star Airways. Not optional, not reactive, proactive, required. The irony that she was now the case study for its necessity was not lost on her. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the mood in the executive holding room had shifted from cold anxiety to suffocating dread. Lauren Baxter sat hunched, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands clasped tightly together as if trying to squeeze out the panic through sheer will. She'd played back the moment in her mind 1,000 times. The slap, the ticket, the expression on Camille's face. She kept hoping she'd remember it differently, that somehow it had all been misunderstood, that it hadn't gone that far. But she couldn't lie to herself anymore. She had meant it. Maybe not the slap, but the words. "You don't belong here." They hadn't slipped out. They'd risen up, fully formed, natural, habitual. That was the worst realization of all. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was muscle memory. She had to face the truth. She didn't just think Camille didn't belong. She believed it. Not consciously, but deeply enough to act on it, without hesitation. And now? Now the woman she had struck wasn't just a powerful black executive. She was the woman who signed her paychecks. A knock at the door startled her. It creaked open. A tall man in security uniform stepped in. "She's back," he said. "Chairwoman Dawson. She's asked to speak with you, alone." Lauren stood slowly. Her legs were stiff, her breath shallow. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Where? Executive boardroom. She's waiting. Camille Dawson stood at the head of a sleek, modern conference table on the top floor of North Star headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Atlanta skyline behind her. The city looked like it always had, impressive, polished, promising. But Camille had lived in cities long enough to know. What you see from above is never what you live on the ground. When Lauren entered, she almost didn't recognize her own reflection in the mirrored walls. Gone was the pristine uniform. Gone was the icy pride. She looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. Her eyes darted to Camille, then immediately dropped. Camille gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. The word wasn't harsh. It wasn't kind either. It was an instruction. Lauren obeyed. There was a long silence. I assume, Camille began, you know why you're here. Lauren nodded, eyes glued to the glass of water in front of her. Camille waited. She'd learned in decades of leadership that silence is often more revealing than interrogation. Finally, Lauren spoke. Her voice cracked on the first word. I was wrong. Camille tilted her head. You were unprofessional, disrespectful, arrogant, prejudiced. But you weren't just wrong, Miss Baxter. You were reckless. You gambled your whole career on a 5-second assumption. Tears welled in Lauren's eyes, but she didn't blink them away. You weren't just doing your job, you were gatekeeping. And don't lie to yourself again. That gate didn't have rules. It had a face, mine. Lauren swallowed hard, her throat burning. Camille leaned forward, voice quiet but unflinching. Let me ask you something. And I want the truth, not the version you recite to HR. Lauren nodded. If I had not been the CEO, if I had just been an elderly black woman with a cane and a first-class ticket, would you have apologized? The question landed like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Lauren's lips parted. No words came. She stared at Camille. And that silence was the answer. Camille sat back, her expression unreadable. I thought so. Lauren finally spoke, barely audible. No, I wouldn't have. Camille nodded once, slowly. Thank you. That is the first honest thing you've said today. I didn't know how deep it was, Lauren whispered. In me. That's what makes it dangerous, Camille replied. The worst kind of bias isn't the one you scream, it's the one you whisper to yourself until it becomes a belief, until you carry it into rooms, uniforms, jobs, and use it to draw invisible lines around people's worth. Lauren let the words settle. She didn't try to justify herself. She knew she couldn't. Camille picked up the document from the table and slid it across. This is what's going to happen. You are suspended indefinitely. Your badge, access, and privileges are revoked as of now. But you're not fired, yet. Lauren blinked in surprise. You will attend a 6-month internal training program, Camille continued. Bias deconstruction, racial equity, customer dignity. You will document your progress, submit essays, complete casework, and serve under a mentor. If you complete it and earn your place back, you may reapply for a position at North Star, not as a supervisor, as a staff trainee. Lauren's lips parted. You're giving me a second chance? Camille's voice dropped lower. No. I'm giving us a chance to change this airline from the inside out, a chance to make sure what happened at Gate 823 doesn't happen again, to anyone. You will be the example. If you fail, there will be no third chance, no shielding, no reinstatement. Are we clear? Lauren nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Camille stood. The meeting was over, but the message had only just begun. As Lauren stood too, Camille turned to her one final time. And Lauren? Yes? When I say, you don't belong here, I'm not talking about class. Lauren's face tensed. I'm talking about mindset. And with that, Camille Dawson walked out of the room. Not with triumph, but with purpose. The story wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about rebuilding from ruin, not with fire, but with truth. For 3 days, the hallways of North Star Airways pulsed with whispers, not the usual office gossip, but something sharper, heavier, laced with disbelief and reckoning. She slapped her hand? She didn't know who she was? No, she knew. She just didn't see her. The story had broken online within hours of the incident. Though no official video had been released, witness recordings captured enough. The slap, the stunned silence, the commanding voice of Camille Dawson as she uttered the now iconic words, "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Across social media, a storm gathered. Gate A23, Camille Dawson, she built the airline. Even mainstream news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the flight that shook the skies. Inside North Star's headquarters, every employee had read the internal memo. HR called it a sensitivity audit. Legal called it a containment response. But those who truly understood called it what it really was, a cultural reckoning. And at the center of it all stood one woman, Camille Dawson, not issuing threats, not calling for boycotts, just standing, still and unshakable, like always. Lauren Baxter sat in the rear of North Star's training facility, surrounded by other employees attending mandatory courses on professionalism and inclusion. But she wasn't just attending. She was being monitored. The others didn't know that. They didn't know she was the one who'd become a cautionary tale inside her own company. They didn't know that she wasn't here because of a scheduling rotation, but because of a disciplinary directive signed by the CEO herself. She kept her head down as the instructor entered the room. An older man, probably in his 50s, with the kind of calm expression that comes from spending a lifetime listening more than talking. "Good morning," he said softly, placing a black folder on the desk. "I'm Charles Lin. I'll be guiding you through this program." He didn't ask them to share their names, didn't ask for introductions. He simply opened the folder and held up a printed screenshot. One Lauren instantly recognized. It was her. Frozen mid-motion, mouth open in mid-shout, face twisted with authority and disdain. Camille's face was barely visible in the corner of the image, but her hand, lifted in calm protest, was unmistakable. A still frame of the moment that unraveled a life. "This," Charles said, holding it for everyone to see, "is not just about airline policy. This is about what you don't see, and what happens when you act before seeing." Lauren's face flushed. Every nerve in her body screamed to get up, to run, to explain. But she didn't. She stayed, because that's what Camille Dawson had ordered her to do. And something inside her, the part that had always insisted on being right, was slowly learning to sit with being wrong. Upstairs, in a corner office filled with natural light and glass walls, Camille stood before a framed blueprint of North Star's original flight route. She remembered the night that map had been printed. How she'd cried alone in her apartment, holding the first confirmation that her dream was finally taking off. She remembered the banks that had said no, the partners who'd backed out, the stairs when she walked into investor meetings wearing natural curls and carrying a briefcase older than her shoes. They didn't see her as a CEO back then. Only a black woman trying to play dress-up. So she built the airline anyway. And now? Now even those who sat in the front row still hadn't learned how to recognize her face, because they had never expected someone like her to be the face of power. A knock came at the door. "Come in," Camille said, not turning. It was Jonathan Sharp. "Ma'am, the board approved your training proposal unanimously. Starting next month, all senior flight staff, new and current, will be required to complete a revised course under the Diversity Integrity Act." Camille didn't smile. She didn't celebrate, she just nodded. "We'll call it the Dawson Directive," Jonathan added. That made her pause. She turned finally, her voice even. "No. No? No vanity titles, no names. Call it what it is." Jonathan furrowed his brow. She walked toward the window. "Call it the standard, because it's not a policy, it's the bare minimum." He nodded. She picked up her cane and moved toward her desk. "Anything else?" "Yes," he said hesitantly. "Miss Baxter's preliminary report came in this morning." Camille didn't look up. "She's attending every session, voluntarily staying after class. She's not asking for leniency. She hasn't even filed a grievance." Still, Camille didn't react. Jonathan added one more detail, voice softer now. "She asked to meet with you again, in person, privately." Camille raised her gaze from the desk. Her silence spoke louder than any decision. 3 weeks later, they met again. This time, in a quiet, windowless office on the administrative floor. Not Camille's, not Lauren's, just neutral space. Lauren entered, hands folded. She had removed her name badge. Camille noticed that instantly, but said nothing. "Thank you for meeting me," Lauren said. Camille didn't reply. She gestured to the chair. Lauren sat. There was a beat of silence. Then, "I'm not asking for forgiveness." Camille raised an eyebrow slightly. "I don't deserve that," Lauren continued. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Camille nodded once. "Go on." "I just wanted to tell you something I realized this week," Lauren said. During one of the sessions, Mr. Lin asked us what belonging really meant. Not in theory, but in practice. I couldn't answer it. She looked down at her lap. And then I remembered the exact moment I told you, "You don't belong here." And I realized that I said it because I never truly understood what belonging looked like when it didn't look like me. Camille leaned forward, hands folded across the head of her cane. Lauren continued, her voice thick. "But then I watched you that day, and after. The way you walked, spoke, didn't retaliate. You didn't just belong in that space, you defined it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I've been allowed to exist in every room without being questioned, and you've had to fight for every inch. And I didn't even know. I didn't see it until I saw you." Camille's gaze didn't soften, it deepened. "Why are you really here, Miss Baxter?" Lauren took a breath. "To promise you something. Not for show, not for PR, but for myself." Camille nodded once. "Let's hear it." Lauren placed a small journal on the table. It was worn, edges dog-eared. "I've been writing," she said. "Not just about the training, about my patterns, my past behavior, things I've done that I thought were nothing at the time. Now I know better." Camille looked down at the journal, but didn't touch it. Lauren added quietly, "I want to be the one who teaches this course. Someday, after I've earned it. Not to fix my image, but to help change someone else's before they make the mistake I did." Camille finally spoke, her voice low, thoughtful. "The world doesn't change because you regret it, Miss Baxter. It changes when you do something about it." "I will." Camille stood. Lauren followed. "You won't be reinstated as crew," Camille said. "But next quarter, I'll be piloting a new mentorship branch under the Integrity Initiative. It needs instructors." Lauren's eyes widened. "You're offering me a spot?" "I'm offering you a chance. Whether it becomes a role or just a reminder is up to you." Lauren stepped back, overwhelmed. "Thank you," she whispered. Camille didn't respond. She just extended her hand. And this time, when their palms touched, it wasn't the echo of a slap. It was the start of something entirely new. It had been 27 days since Gate A23 became an unofficial landmark in North Star's history. A moment etched into memory, not with a plaque, but with a sound. A slap against the hand of a woman who built an empire. Camille Dawson didn't mark the days. She marked the progress. Every day since, she'd quietly observed how the ripple had become a wave. Departments once frozen in procedural tradition were now rewriting training guides. Cabin crew meetings that used to begin with beverage ratios now began with open discussions on bias. Employees who never spoke to one another were now holding eye contact a little longer, asking questions a little deeper, and perhaps most importantly, listening with more intention. And she wasn't leading it through memos. She was leading it by simply being present. She sat in on training sessions, appeared unannounced in orientation groups, walked through terminals. Not to test, but to witness. Her presence alone, unspoken and graceful, had become a mirror. And when people saw themselves reflected in her gaze, they were forced to ask, "Do I like who I am right now?" And for Lauren Baxter, that answer had become painfully clear. Lauren didn't return to the skies, not yet. Her suspension remained in effect. But her transformation had taken on a life of its own. 3 weeks into her mandatory re-education, she asked for something unusual. "I want to revisit the scene," she told her mentor, Charles Lynn. "Not as a punishment, as a step toward making peace with who I was and choosing who I'll become." Charles hesitated. "You mean Gate A23? She nodded. "You know, people still whisper about that moment?" "I know," she said, "but I'm done running from whispers." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll come with you." It was early morning when they arrived. The terminal was quieter than usual, bathed in soft gold light and half filled with yawning travelers. Gate A23 was exactly as she remembered it. The polished floor, the branded carpet, the gentle hum of airport machinery. But this time it felt smaller. As if the event had grown beyond the space that once contained it. She walked slowly to the very spot where it had all happened. Her hands trembled. This was where she had raised her voice. This was where she'd slapped a hand holding a cane. This was where she had torn a woman's boarding pass piece by piece, not knowing she was tearing something far more sacred. Dignity. Charles stood a few steps behind her, silent. Lauren crouched to the ground and placed her hand gently on the floor. "I never saw the cane," she whispered. "Not really. I just saw what I didn't want to see, a disruption to my illusion of control." Charles walked forward and placed a folded slip of paper on the floor beside her. "What's this?" she asked. "Your first-class boarding pass," he said simply. "Printed with your name, your ID number, your employee role as of your last flight. Symbolic." Lauren stared at it. She didn't touch it. "Do you want me to tear it?" she asked, voice shaky. Charles shook his head. "No, that's what you did last time. This time, you write on it." She blinked. "Write what?" He handed her a pen. "Your new role." Hours later, Camille Dawson received a message from Charles Lynn. Attached was a photo, a slip of paper, North Star First Class, Seat 1A, with one handwritten line across it. "Mentor in progress." Camille stared at it for a long time, then closed her laptop and stood. She walked slowly to the wide window of her office, overlooking the tarmac. Below, planes crawled across the runways like metal swans, carrying lives and stories and second chances. She tapped the glass gently with her fingertips, her mind spiraling back to a moment she had buried for years. It had been decades earlier, long before North Star was born. Camille had been a law student on her first solo flight. Nervous, underprepared, proud of the economy seat she had bought herself with her own paycheck. She had walked confidently to the gate, ticket in hand, and someone had stepped in front of her. A white attendant, calm voice, apologetic tone. "I'm sorry, miss, this isn't your zone." She had tried to speak, but he had already moved to block her path. No shouting, no slap, just the quiet violence of assumption. She had never forgotten it, and maybe that's why she never became bitter. Because she knew the pain was not in being seen as less, it was in knowing you were more, and watching people fail to see it. She had built North Star to defy that feeling. But it still found a way to board the flight. That's why Lauren's journey mattered. Because change wasn't about removing flawed people, it was revealing them, offering the impossible. A mirror. And a map. 1 week later, North Star held its first Public Integrity Summit. It wasn't a press stunt. No red carpet, just a gathering of senior crew, airport staff, and leadership, and a stage. Camille opened the event with a single statement. "Before you speak," she said, "ask yourself, am I building a bridge, or am I swinging a gate?" The crowd fell silent. Then she nodded to the next speaker. Lauren Baxter stepped into the light. No uniform, no title, just a voice, raw and real. She held nothing in her hands, and everything in her eyes. "I am the flight attendant who slapped the hand of a black woman and called her a liar," she began. Murmurs rippled. "But I'm also the woman who now understands that you don't fix a mistake by denying it. You fix it by dissecting it, holding it, naming it, and then doing the work to unlearn what made you make it." She took a breath. "I didn't lose my job, not because I was right, but because I was given the chance to become right." Silence again. Then Camille stood and approached the stage. She didn't take the microphone. She just looked at Lauren and said, "You tore the ticket, but you couldn't tear who I am." Lauren nodded. Camille turned to the crowd. "But that's the truth for all of us. No one can tear who we are unless we hand them the scissors." A quiet wave of applause began. Not loud, not performative, earned. Lauren stepped down, and in that moment, there was no before or after. There was just now. 2 women. One once blinded by power, one forged by its absence, now standing side by side, not in victory, but in understanding. Later that evening, Ethan Brooks watched the summit recap from his hotel room. He smiled faintly as Camille's final quote played again on screen. "You don't make a company great by removing flaws. You make it great by refusing to ignore them." He picked up his phone and sent a message. To Dana Lawrence. "Think she'll ever get back on a plane as a crew member?" Dana replied instantly. To Ethan Brooks. "I think she already did. But this time she's flying with people, not above them." Ethan smiled, and somewhere in a quiet hangar, North Star Flight 934 was preparing for takeoff again. A new journey, a new crew, a new standard. The moment the summit concluded, something intangible but unmistakable settled into the air around North Star Airways. Not a declaration, not a policy, but a shift. For the first time in years, people weren't just following procedures. They were questioning them. They weren't just attending trainings. They were showing up to learn. And at the heart of it all, Camille Dawson remained quiet. She wasn't interested in the applause, or the headlines, or the sudden waves of corporate allies hoping to be seen in proximity to her. She had no interest in building a brand around her pain. She was here for one thing: to make sure no one else ever had to prove they belonged on their own plane. That was the battle she'd been fighting for decades. And now she wasn't fighting it alone. Lauren Baxter sat at a long table in North Star's Ethics Training Center, a notebook open in front of her. But today she wasn't a student. She was the instructor. Or more accurately, a guide. The nameplate in front of her didn't say supervisor. It didn't say attendant. It said Lauren Baxter, Recovery and Reentry Program, Mentorship Division War. And just beneath it, in small engraved italics, growth begins with admission. Across from her sat 9 new hires, diverse in background, varied in expression, and all visibly curious. None of them had been told her backstory, not formally, but a few recognized her. One leaned over to another and whispered, "That's her, the one from Gate 23. Lauren heard it. She didn't flinch. She didn't blush. Instead, she addressed it directly. "Yes," she said calmly. "I'm the flight attendant who made a mistake. A public one. One that hurt someone and exposed something I hadn't even realized was inside me." The room stilled. She folded her hands. "But that mistake also became the turning point of my life. Not because I defended it, but because I faced it." One of the new recruits, a young man named Khalil, raised his hand tentatively. "Can I ask something kind of blunt?" Lauren smiled. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." "What was going through your mind when you told her, Camille Dawson, that she didn't belong in first class?" Lauren inhaled slowly. The silence afterward wasn't avoidance. It was reflection. "I think I was terrified," she finally said. "Terrified of being wrong. Terrified of losing control. Terrified of what her presence said about me. Because I had never seen a woman like her in a place of power without being warned first. My brain reached for the most familiar shield." "And that was?" "Assumption," she said quietly, dressed up in a uniform, polished with fake authority. Another recruit, a Latina woman named Rebecca, chimed in. "So what made you finally see her?" Lauren looked at her. "Her silence," she said. "That's what broke me. Not her power, not the title, not the CEO bombshell. Just the way she didn't stoop to my level. She didn't need to scream to shatter everything I thought I knew." She paused, then added, almost in a whisper, "The worst part? I didn't see her because I didn't think she could be someone I'd one day have to answer to. I saw her through a cracked lens, and I broke both of us in that moment." Rebecca's voice softened. "And now?" Lauren sat up straighter. "Now I fix the lens. Every day, and I teach others to recognize when theirs is smudged before they use it on someone else." The room was silent, but not tense. Reflective. Lauren reached into her bag and pulled out a folded page, the same paper she had written on at Gate A23 weeks earlier. She unfolded it and placed it flat on the table. The words mentor and progress were still visible, but now they were surrounded by notes. Scribbles, signatures, quotes from others. "This is my new boarding pass," she said. "Every time someone asks a hard question, I write down what I learned from it. It reminds me that my growth doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being willing to change in public." She handed the page to Khalil. "Start yours today." He took it, hesitating. "Even if I haven't made a mistake like that?" Lauren gave him a look that held no judgment, only truth. "If you live long enough and lead long enough, you will. It's not about if, it's about when. And when it happens, what you do next is what defines you." That evening, Camille Dawson stood in her home office, flipping through a stack of proposals. Her assistant had slipped a note on top. Mentorship Division Weekly Report. Lead Instructor, Lauren Baxter. Camille paused. She wasn't the sentimental type, not anymore. The world had beaten that out of her by the time she was 30. But this was something else. Not redemption. Proof. Proof that grace, when extended with boundaries, could rebuild a woman from rubble. Proof that not every mistake had to become a scar if it was turned into a lesson. She turned the page and found a photo tucked inside. Lauren, standing beside her mentorship group. Not posing, just listening. One hand tucked in her pocket, the other holding a stack of feedback forms. And in her eyes, not shame, but service. Camille set the report aside and stepped onto her balcony. Atlanta shimmered in the distance, lights dancing across glass buildings like reflections of the stories being rewritten behind those windows. Stories like hers, like Lauren's. Like so many who had been told, explicitly or silently, "You don't belong here." She took a deep breath, the cool air brushing against her cheeks. The journey wasn't over. Not for the company. Not for her. And certainly not for the thousands of travelers who would walk through North Star terminals, trusting that someone in uniform would see them fully, not just as a seat number or a ticket, but as a human being. 3 days later, Camille boarded a flight, not in disguise, not in secret. Just another business traveler with a hand-carved cane, a tailored coat, and a passport case worn at the edges. The gate agent smiled and scanned her ticket. "Welcome aboard, Miss Dawson." Camille gave a polite nod. She turned toward the jet bridge and paused. A familiar voice behind her called softly, "Miss Dawson?" She turned. Lauren stood a few steps away, not in flight uniform, but in an administrative badge, clipboard in hand. "I just wanted to say thank you," Lauren said quietly. "For what?" "For not tearing me apart when I tore your ticket." Camille smiled, faint but warm. "You tore a piece of paper," she said, "but you couldn't tear who I am." Lauren nodded. "I know that now." Camille added, "Just promise me something. Anything. If you ever see another passenger being treated the way you once treated me, I'll stop it," Lauren said immediately, without hesitation. Camille offered her hand. Lauren took it. This time, no cameras, no witnesses, no press. Just two women, standing at the threshold of the same door, one walking in, one holding it open, and both knowing that the true uniform was integrity. The flight Camille Dawson boarded that day wasn't just taking her to another city. It was transporting her into the quiet aftermath of a storm she had once stood in the center of. No longer the furious eye, but the sky that follows. As she settled into her seat in first class 1A once again, the flight crew moved with visible poise. Each interaction was polite, but more than that, there was an energy among them. Focused, aware, intentional. Not robotic politeness, but practiced presence. Camille could always tell the difference. It wasn't in the way someone poured the coffee. It was in how they looked at you, whether their eyes acknowledged the soul behind your seat number or not. This crew? They saw her. Not because of who she was, but because they were being trained to see everyone. And in that, she found something unexpected. Peace. Back at North Star headquarters, Lauren Baxter stood at a podium in the employee auditorium. Not on trial, not apologizing, but presenting. It had taken 3 months to get here. 3 months of sitting with her discomfort. 3 months of reviewing training modules, reading employee letters, even participating in simulated conflict scenarios that mirrored what had once been her greatest mistake. Now, her audience wasn't angry passengers or lawyers. It was the future. 73 new hires, flight attendants, gate agents, regional managers, all staring back at her. They'd been told this was their final orientation session. They hadn't been told who she was. Not until now. "I know what some of you are thinking," Lauren began, voice calm even. "You're wondering why someone like me is standing here, someone whose name trended for all the wrong reasons. Someone who made one of the most public mistakes in our airline's history." A few nervous glances shifted around the room. "I'll tell you why," she continued. "Because it's easy to remember a scandal, but harder to follow the story past its most shameful moment." She clicked the remote in her hand, revealing a slide behind her. It wasn't a press clipping. It was her official re-entry file, redacted, labeled confidential, except for one line. "Transformation is not owed, it is earned." Lauren stepped away from the podium. "I didn't come here today to ask for forgiveness. I came to show you what I've learned, and what you will now be responsible for carrying forward." She looked them over. "One day," she said, "you'll be tired, maybe behind schedule, maybe stressed, and you'll look at someone, a passenger who looks like they don't belong in first class, or speaks with an accent, or wears something unfamiliar, and your brain will want to categorize them, judge them, decide who they are before you speak to them." She paused. "That's when you remember me, not because I was punished, but because I was allowed to come back and teach others how not to become me." She let the silence stretch. Integrity isn't about being perfect, it's about being aware enough to ask, "What am I missing right now?" and brave enough to course correct before you make someone else pay for your blindness. The young black woman in the front row raised her hand. "Miss Baxter, do you think you've earned back your place yet?" Lauren smiled. "No," she said, "but I've earned my direction, and for now that's enough." The room rose in applause, not loud, not grand, but steady and earned. A few floors up, Camille Dawson stood at a high-rise window, reviewing the new orientation footage on her tablet. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Her finger hovered over the pause button as Lauren's final words echoed through the speaker. "I've earned my direction." Camille turned to Jonathan Sharp, standing a few feet behind her. "Set a meeting," she said. "Her, me, and a proposal I think she's finally ready to make." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "You're inviting her to pitch?" "No," Camille said, eyes still on the screen. "I'm requiring it." A week later, Lauren stood outside Camille's office again, but this time, not as a scolded subordinate. She clutched a small stack of papers and a single manila envelope. When the assistant waved her in, Camille didn't look up at first. She gestured to the seat. Lauren took it, calm now, composed. "I hear your summit sessions are drawing interest," Camille said. 4 more regions asked for remote training access last week. Camille looked up. "Good," she said. "Then, you brought something?" Lauren slid the envelope forward. "It's called Vision 12. 12 modules, not just on equity, but lived empathy, policy and practice, conflict recovery, real-world simulations, not just roleplay, immersion." Camille opened the folder, skimmed. Then she looked up. "Why you?" Lauren didn't blink. "Because I know exactly what it feels like to hold power in your hand and use it the wrong way. And I also know what it feels like to live with that and choose to turn it into something better." Camille held her gaze. The office was quiet. The city pulsed beyond the windows. And then, Camille asked the one question Lauren wasn't prepared for. "Are you proud of what you've become?" Lauren hesitated. Then softly, "Not yet, but I'm proud of what I'm becoming." Camille nodded slowly, then closed the folder. She didn't approve it, she didn't reject it. She simply said, "Don't thank me. Show me what you've built because of it." 1 month later, a new flight attendant entered the training wing at North Star. He was nervous, his tie was crooked, his shoes were scuffed. As he waited outside his orientation room, he noticed a large framed photo hanging in the hallway. It was 2 women shaking hands. One older, composed, with a cane in one hand and authority in the other. The other younger, eyes wet but steady, mid-handshake. A plaque beneath it read, "The Standard." A mistake faced, a lesson shared, a culture changed. And just beneath it, Lauren Baxter, Director of Culture Recovery and Empathy Training. Camille Dawson, Chairwoman and CEO, North Star Airways. The new hire stared at the photo for a long moment, then turned toward the classroom. Inside, the words printed on the whiteboard read, "The uniform doesn't make you right, the heart does." And the woman standing at the front of the room, smiling, welcoming. Once broken, now rebuilt. The buzz at North Star's headquarters had shifted again. There was a new energy flowing through the corridors, a quiet momentum that wasn't manufactured by PR or corporate statements. It was organic, earned. People didn't just nod at one another anymore. They stopped. They connected. And at the heart of that shift, Lauren Baxter had become something entirely new. Not a symbol of scandal, not a redeemed employee, but a standard bearer. She still carried the weight of her past, but now she wore it like a pilot wears wings, earned, not given. Her new role as Director of Culture Recovery and Empathy Training was not created for her. She built it, from scratch. Camille Dawson hadn't handed it to her. She had merely said, "If you're serious, don't just tell me. Prove it, create it." And she had. What began as one module, one class, had evolved into the Standard, a multi-tiered empathy program now required for every new hire and recertifying crew member across all North Star divisions. But today was different. Because today was Lauren's return to the sky. She stood in front of the mirror in the crew lounge, staring at her reflection for a long time. The uniform was new, but it felt like borrowed skin, not because she didn't belong in it, but because she now knew what it meant. She hadn't worn it since the incident, not since Gate A23, not since she tore a woman's boarding pass and, unknowingly, tried to tear down the very culture she now worked to protect. Her hands moved slowly as she pinned her new name badge, Lauren Baxter Empathy Crew Specialist. A role that didn't exist 6 months ago. A role she had crafted out of the wreckage of her worst day. Behind her, a few junior attendants whispered, "Is that her?" "Yeah, that's her." She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She picked up her crew binder, walked out of the lounge, and toward Gate A24. A different gate. But the same truth waiting to be tested. Meanwhile, aboard the aircraft, passengers were already settling in. Camille Dawson was among them, seated not in 1A this time, but 3C, by choice. She had boarded quietly, No announcement. No entourage. Just a woman with a soft gray scarf and a cane she didn't need for balance anymore, but for presence. A young man sitting across the aisle leaned toward her, eyes cautious. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you?" Camille turned, giving him the full weight of her gaze, calm, composed, direct. "Yes," she replied simply, "I'm her." He smiled awkwardly. "I thought so. I saw the clip from last year." Camille offered a half smile. "Then you didn't see the whole story." "No," he said quietly, "but I'm glad I get to see how it ends." Camille shook her head softly. "It doesn't end. It evolves, like the people who choose to learn from it." Just then the PA crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard North Star Airways Flight 262 to Chicago. Today, your lead cabin support is Lauren Baxter, our new empathy crew specialist. She'll be here to assist you with anything that involves comfort, inclusion, or if you just need a human moment in the sky." A ripple went through the cabin. Not laughter, not mockery, just something new. Respect. Lauren walked down the aisle slowly. Every row she passed felt like another chapter she was writing, and then she reached 3C. Camille looked up, and for a beat they said nothing. Lauren knelt slightly, voice steady. "Is there anything I can offer before takeoff, Miss Dawson?" Camille regarded her. "Tell me this," she said. "Why did you come back to the sky?" Lauren's reply was instant. "Because this time," she said, "I'm not just boarding the plane, I'm building the runway." Camille smiled just slightly, then nodded. And Lauren stood. They didn't need to say more. They'd already said everything in action. During the flight, something remarkable happened. Lauren didn't just perform her duties. She didn't just assist passengers. She engaged. When a mother struggled with a child's anxiety, Lauren crouched down and whispered to the child with the same tone Camille had once used with her. When a man snapped at a crew member over a misplaced drink, Lauren didn't scold him. She asked, "Is something bothering you beyond the soda?" And when a young black woman in row 10D looked visibly nervous about speaking up about her broken tray, Lauren didn't wait. She approached, smiled gently, and said, "You don't have to ask permission to be treated right. You already deserve it." The woman blinked, then smiled, then relaxed, and Camille saw it. Not as a CEO, not as a passenger, but as a witness to transformation. When the flight landed in Chicago, applause broke out, not because they'd landed on time, but because everyone knew this flight had been different. More than a route, it had been a full-circle moment. Lauren stood at the exit, thanking each passenger not with protocol, but with presence. When Camille approached, Lauren stepped forward. "Thank you for flying with us today." Camille leaned in slightly. "And thank you," she said quietly, "for taking your worst moment and building something no one else could have." Lauren nodded, breath catching slightly. Camille turned to leave, but paused, then said without turning back, "Don't let them define you by your past. Let them meet you in your future." The next day, a photo appeared on North Star's intranet. Lauren Baxter, standing at the aircraft door, smiling softly as passengers exit. Below it, a simple caption, "Not a comeback, a continuation." Camille never shared the image. She didn't need to. But a note appeared under her desk blotter the next morning, in her own handwriting. "There's no flight path for redemption. You create it mid-air. And sometimes the turbulence is the training ground for the pilot you never thought you could become." The ripple effects of Flight 262 didn't stop when the wheels touched down. In fact, the real journey had just begun. Within 24 hours, a handwritten note from a passenger circulated online, snapped on the back of a napkin, posted by a teenager whose mother had flown that day. "Dear North Star, I saw something rare today. A flight attendant asked my mom not just what she wanted to drink, but how she was doing. Like, really doing. You made her feel visible. That's not training. That's heart. Please keep this kind of flying alive." Row 10D. It went viral in less than a day. And though the post didn't name her, everyone inside North Star knew exactly who the attendant was. Lauren Baxter. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being shared online as a symbol of failure. She was being recognized as a vessel of restoration. Camille Dawson sat in the conference room 2 days later, surrounded by the senior board. The quarterly meeting had just concluded. Financial reports were solid, customer satisfaction up 11%, turnover down 9%, but none of that had caused the shift in tone in the room. It was the final agenda item: Cultural Transformation Metrics, the Standard Initiative. One of the board members, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Jensen, leaned back in her seat. "I'll be honest," she said, tapping her pen. "When you brought Lauren back, I thought it would haunt us, PR-wise, I mean, but it hasn't. It's shifted the energy. People feel safer, heard. Even those who didn't agree with the choice now can't argue with the results." Camille offered a calm nod. "Redemption is rarely safe," she said, "but it's always potent." Another executive, arms crossed, spoke next. "What happens if she slips? If it happens again with someone else?" Camille didn't hesitate. "Then we confront it. Publicly, honestly. But we don't stop the mission because we're afraid of shadows. We shine brighter lights." She paused. "And Lauren isn't here to be perfect. She's here to prove that change isn't theoretical. It's lived." No one spoke for a beat. Then Margaret said softly, "I think it's time we stop calling her the former incident. She's our new architect." Camille smiled faintly. She always was. She just had to see herself through a different lens. Downstairs in the training wing, Lauren stood by a glass panel, watching the next generation of crew finish their final empathy scenario. She wasn't running the session today. She was observing one of her new protégés, a bright, determined black woman named Jada, who had once emailed Lauren saying, "I've watched you rebuild your wings in front of the world. I want to learn how to build mine before I fall." Jada now stood at the front of the room, guiding trainees through a difficult conflict simulation. One passenger in the scenario had made a racially insensitive joke toward another. Instead of panicking or brushing past it, the mock attendant paused and said, "We don't ignore wounds here, we treat them." The room froze, and then nodded. Lauren's eyes misted, not because Jada had said something new, but because it was working. The seeds planted in her darkest hour were now blooming. A staffer approached her from behind. "Miss Baxter?" She turned, wiping her eyes. "Chairwoman Dawson would like to see you, top floor." Lauren blinked. "Now?" She said one line. The assistant replied, "Bring your notebook, not your past." Upstairs, Camille sat alone at a corner table in the top-floor lounge, a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline glowing behind her. She didn't greet Lauren like a boss. She didn't rise. She simply gestured to the seat across from her. Lauren sat, notebook in hand. Camille nodded toward it. "What's inside?" Lauren opened it slowly, revealing pages filled with staff comments, journal entries, pilot test quotes, even napkin notes from passengers. Feedback. From the standard, every lesson, every mistake, every breakthrough. Camille took the notebook, flipped through a few pages, then stopped. On one page, scrawled in blue ink, was a quote from a 14-year-old girl flying with her grandmother. "Miss Lawrence smiled at my grandma like she was the queen. She didn't know we were poor. She just saw my grandma like she was magic." Camille tapped the page gently. "Read that back to me." Lauren did. Camille leaned forward. "That," she said, "is why you're here. Because when the world tries to measure people by their ticket class, their wardrobe, their accent, their history, you teach them how to see the magic first." Lauren's throat tightened. Camille handed her a sealed envelope. "What is it?" Lauren asked. "An offer," Camille replied. "But only if you're ready to stop reacting to who you were and start designing who we all need you to be." Lauren opened it. Inside, a formal proposal. Vice President of People and Culture Strategy, full department, full authority, answerable only to the CEO. Her hand trembled slightly. This is more than a promotion," Camille said. "It's a runway, one you'll build, one others will land on after weathering storms." Lauren looked up. "Do you think I'm ready?" Camille didn't blink. "I didn't ask if you were. I'm telling you it's time." Lauren took a long breath and nodded. "I'll do it." Camille stood, and for the first time in months, they hugged. Not cautiously, but completely. And when Camille whispered in Lauren's ear, it wasn't a warning, it was a blessing. When you don't see someone's worth, it doesn't disappear. It waits for you to open your eyes. Thank you for opening mine too. 2 weeks later, a new banner was unveiled across North Star's internal portal. "Welcome to the new sky." Empathy is not a skill, it's a compass. Lauren Baxter, VP Culture and People Strategy. Below it, a staff-wide announcement. The standard is now global. Across all departments, across all ranks. We don't hire for perfection, we grow through reflection. And beside it, a photo of Lauren, hand in hand with Camille, walking through Terminal A. No security, No entourage, just two women who once stood on opposite ends of a gate, now, walking through one together. It had been 1 year since gate A23. The corridor looked the same. The polished floors still reflected sunlight in perfect slants. The vending machines still hummed beside the wide glass windows. Gate numbers glowed in soft LED blue. But something was different now. Not the terminal, the people. From the moment travelers passed through North Star's TSA line, something subtle had changed. Uniforms came with softer eyes. Voices, once clipped, efficient, now carried warmth. And the occasional "can I help you?" didn't sound like a script anymore. It sounded like an invitation. Lauren Baxter walked through the concourse not with fear, but with presence. A badge on her blazer read, Lauren Baxter, Vice President, Culture and People Strategy, North Star Airways. She'd arrived early that morning, not for a ceremony, not for a press event, but for a classroom. Because despite the title, despite the office she now commanded, Lauren hadn't stopped doing the work that saved her. Listening, teaching, learning. She entered the small amphitheater tucked behind the training division, where 25 fresh hires waited, nervously straightening their ties, brushing lint from skirts. She set her coffee down and opened the session with a single sentence. Raise your hand if you've ever looked at someone and decided who they were before they spoke. 25 hands went up. She smiled. Good, that means you're honest. That's where it begins. Then she walked over to the whiteboard and wrote a number, A23. The room stirred. Someone whispered. Another glanced at the person next to them. Lauren turned and faced them fully. My name is Lauren Baxter, she said, and I once stood at this gate. I raised my voice. I made a woman feel small. I slapped a hand that was holding a cane. The air tightened. And that woman? She built the company I work for. She was the reason I was even standing there in a uniform at all. But in that moment, I couldn't see her, because my own reflection of power had been twisted by fear and pride. She let it sit. She could feel their discomfort, their curiosity, their awe. I'm not here to tell you how to be perfect, she said. I'm here to show you what it means to take accountability and build something with it. Because when you damage someone, even unintentionally, you don't get to erase it. You get to rebuild around it. She reached into her folder and held up a torn boarding pass. It had been framed, preserved in glass. This, she said, was the ticket I tore. Gasps, silence. But the woman I tore it from? She didn't fire me. She placed it gently on the desk beside her. She gave me something far more terrifying. A second chance. Not out of mercy, out of vision, because she believed I could become a bridge instead of a barrier. That afternoon, Camille Dawson arrived at the same terminal. Only this time she wasn't walking through as the CEO. She was arriving as a keynote speaker. The National Aviation Culture and Empathy Summit had chosen North Star's HQ as its venue for the first time. And Camille, reluctantly, agreed to address the audience of CEOs, HR leaders, and cultural architects from the most respected airlines in the world. She didn't rehearse, didn't use notes. Instead, when she stepped onto the low-lit stage, she looked out at the rows of suits and screens and said, Some of you may know me as the woman who was slapped at a boarding gate. Others know me as the CEO of North Star. But before either of those labels, I was a little girl who watched her mother get kicked off a bus for asking a question. She paused, and I remember how quiet my mother was that day. She didn't yell. She just held my hand tighter. I didn't understand it then, but now I know exactly what that silence meant. It meant, I will survive this moment, but I will make sure you never have to. She leaned on her cane gently and scanned the crowd. I built this airline so people like my mother would no longer have to ask permission to be seen. But no matter how high you build, unconscious bias will crawl through the cracks. She gestured to the screen behind her, which now displayed a photo, Lauren Baxter, hand outstretched in midair, shaking hands with a new recruit in uniform. That woman tore my boarding pass, Camille said, voice even, but I gave her a blueprint. A hush swept through the room. And then, she is now the architect of the most effective culture transformation model in this industry, and not because she said sorry, but because she never stopped earning it. Applause followed, not polite, not obligatory, but thunderous. Because everyone in that room had been taught to bury shame, and now they were being shown something braver, to confront it and rise through it. Later that night, Lauren sat on a bench just outside the gates, looking up at the planes blinking against the navy blue sky. Camille approached quietly. No cane today, just comfortable shoes and a soft charcoal coat. Mind if I join you? Lauren smiled. You always ask like I'd say no. Camille sat. They said nothing for a while. Until Camille broke the silence. Do you remember the first thing I said to you after the incident? Lauren nodded. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. Camille turned toward her. I didn't mean the slap. Lauren blinked. Camille continued. I meant the moment before it. The moment you decided who I was. Lauren's throat tightened. I know, Camille smiled, but I've also never told you what I thought the first time you looked at me after. When? Lauren asked. When you stood on that stage, Camille said. At the summit. When you said I've earned my direction. Lauren waited. I thought, Camille said, her voice lowering, she didn't just learn a lesson. She became the lesson others were too afraid to teach. A lump formed in Lauren's throat, and then Camille reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Lauren took it, confused. What's this? Open it. Inside, a small embossed card. Camille Dawson and Lauren Baxter, co-authors The Standard, a guide to dismantling bias and rebuilding integrity in the skies. Lauren stared. Wait, you want me to write with you? Camille smiled. No, I want you to lead. I'll write the foreword. You write the future. Lauren laughed softly, but her voice cracked. Are you sure the world is ready for me to tell this story? Camille placed a hand on hers. The world's already living it. You're just finally brave enough to give it a name. 2 months later, the book was published. The Standard hit the shelves quietly, without a splashy campaign or billboards, but within weeks, it became required reading in over 60 airlines globally. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And on page 1, just beneath the dedication, a single sentence was written. To anyone who has ever been dismissed, doubted, or dehumanized, this story is for you. Because your worth was never missing. It was just waiting for the world to open its eyes. And for once, it finally had. She tried to tear a boarding pass, but what she really tore was trust. And yet, what she received in return wasn't revenge. It was a second chance, and a blueprint to change the skies forever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes that people can grow, that dignity matters, and that grace isn't weakness. It's power in its highest form. Subscribe for more stories that remind us the most powerful transformations begin with the hardest truths.